They won't admit it, but no contact is breaking the avoidant from within. You may think that silence is weakness. You may think that stepping back means you're giving up, but let me tell you something: when you go no contact with an avoidant person, not as a game, not out of spite, but from a place of self-respect, you're doing the very thing their patterns aren't built to handle. Avoidants build walls to protect themselves from intimacy, but what they're really afraid of is connection, because connection means vulnerability, and vulnerability terrifies someone who never learned that love could be safe. So when you remove yourself, your presence, your energy, your consistency, they feel it. They just won't admit it. Why? Because if they admit that your absence matters, they also admit that your presence mattered. And for someone who's built an identity around being detached, that's earth-shattering. You think they're unaffected, but inside, they're rattled because they lost control of the narrative they were comfortable with, the one where you'd always be there, no matter how little they gave back. No contact isn't cruelty. It's clarity. It says, I'm not chasing someone who runs from real love. It says, I'm not dimming my light to fit into your shadow. It says, heal at your pace, but not at the cost of my peace. You can't fix someone who isn't even facing their own broken patterns, but you can heal by walking away and letting your silence say what words never could. Avoidants fear vulnerability, not you. This is one of the most misunderstood truths in modern relationships. When someone with an avoidant attachment style starts to pull away, it's easy to take it personally. You begin to question your words, your actions, even your worth. You replay every moment in your head, wondering what you did wrong to make them distance themselves. But the truth is, it's not about you. It's about what your presence and emotional availability represent to them risk. You see, avoidants didn't learn that emotional closeness was safe. Often they grew up in environments where love was conditional, unpredictable, or overwhelming. Intimacy might have been smothering, inconsistent, or even absent, so they adapted. They learned to rely on themselves and to suppress their emotional needs because depending on someone else felt dangerous. To them, love feels like a loss of control. Vulnerability feels like exposure. And when someone like you shows up with consistency, warmth, and connection, it shakes the foundation of everything they've built to keep themselves safe. They don't fear you as a person. They fear what it would mean to truly open up to you. The moment things start to get emotionally intimate, whether it's a deeper conversation, a sign of commitment, or even just regular affection, they feel the walls closing in. Their instinct is to flee, not because they don't care, but because caring deeply threatens the fragile balance they've created within themselves. They tell themselves they need space, that they're not ready, or that it's just not working. But under this, their nervous system is sounding alarms. Intimacy to an avoidant feels like stepping off a cliff with no parachute. This is why your presence, especially if you're emotionally healthy, available, and open, can feel intense to them. It's not about your flaws or imperfections. It's about the fact that you represent something they've never been to handling emotionally secure love. When you show up consistently, when you speak your truth, when you hold space for connection, they interpret that as pressure. Not because you're doing anything wrong, because they don't yet have the tools to receive that kind of love. So when they pull back, shut down, or seem cold, it's not rejection. It's fear. Fear of being seen, fear of needing someone, fear of losing control. And what hurts the most is they likely won't say any of this out loud. They won't admit they're scared. They'll rationalize their behavior, blame timing, or say they're just not feeling it. But underneath all of that, they're terrified of the one thing you're off: so freeing connection without strings, love without manipulation, and intimacy without chaos. This is why understanding the avoidance fear is so important, because when you can see their distance not as a statement about you, but as a reflection of their internal struggle, you stop internalizing their withdrawal as rejection and start protecting your peace instead. No contact creates discomfort in their avoidance. When someone with an avoidant attachment style experiences you stepping away, truly stepping away, they may appear unbothered on the surface. You might see them carrying on with their life as if nothing happened. Reach out, don't check in, and they certainly don't chase after you. But what you don't see is what's happening beneath that calm, distant exterior, a growing sense of unease that they won't admit, even to themselves. Avoidants rely on emotional distance as a form of control. They feel safe when they can keep people at arm's length. It allows them to engage on their terms when they feel ready, and only to the extent that they feel is manageable. But when you implement no contact, not as a manipulative tactic, but as a boundary, they lose control of the dynamic. For the first time, they are no longer in the driver's seat. You are no longer orbiting around their indecision or waiting for them to meet you halfway. You've removed your energy, your attention, and your emotional availability. And whether they acknowledge it or not, they feel the shift. The thing about avoidance is they are not immune to connection. They just fear the consequences of it. So when that connection disappears, it doesn't sit comfortably with them. At first, they might feel a sense of relief. They'll tell themselves it's good to have space. That maybe the relationship was too intense, that they needed time to think. But as the silence stretches on and your presence remains absent, something starts to change. That relief begins to morph into something more unfamiliar and discomfort. Your absence begins to challenge the beliefs they've used to protect themselves. The belief that people aren't reliable, that love always leads to suffocation, that it's safer to be alone. But if all those things were true, why does your silence feel so heavy? Why does your absence echo louder than your presence? It's not that they suddenly become emotionally fluent overnight, but a crack forms in their narrative. And through that crack, feelings they buried start to surface. Still, this isn't about show it. They might stay silent, they might post photos as if nothing's changed, or they might even start seeing someone new. But those actions are often distractions, not indicators of genuine peace. Because no contact doesn't give you space to heal. It also creates space for them to reflect, whether they like it or not. And that space can be deeply uncomfortable for someone used to avoiding their emotions. In fact, for many avoidants, the discomfort of no contact is the first time they are forced to sit with the consequences of their emotional unavailability. They don't have you soothing, explaining, or chasing. They're left with their own echo. And in that silence, they begin to feel the weight of what they've pushed away. Not all of them will reach out. Not all of them will change, but make no mistake, your silence disrupts their patterns. It confronts them with something they usually run from. The reality that people won't always wait while they figure out how to show up. Silence is a message in itself. Often, we're taught that communication means words, texts, calls, heart-to-heart conversations. And yes, those are important. But in some situations, especially with emotionally unavailable or avoidant individuals, silence carries a weight that words simply cannot. When someone has become used to you being the one who reaches out, who explains, who holds the emotional space for both of you, your silence breaks a rhythm they've come to rely on. And that break doesn't go unnoticed, even if they pretend it does. You don't need to slam a door to show it's closed. The absence of sound is often louder than any shouting match or desperate plea. When you stop responding, stop explaining, stop justifying your feelings or presence, what you're really doing is changing the dynamic entirely. You're taking your energy back, and that energy, your warmth, your care, your emotional availability, had a presence in their life, even if they didn't acknowledge it. People with avoidant tendencies often convince themselves that others are replaceable, that they're better off alone, that closeness equals loss of identity or freedom. So when you go silent, they expect themselves to feel better. They assume that your disappearance will bring them the peace they think they've been missing. But what silence actually does is create space. And in that space, their assumptions begin to unravel. What they thought would be relief begins to feel like emptiness. The very silence they wanted becomes an uncomfortable mirror, forcing them to sit with what they pushed away. Your silence tells a story. It says, I am no longer available for one-sided love. It says, I have nothing left to prove. It says, if you want connection, meet me where I am, or not at all. That's not cruelty, that's strength. It's you stepping into your power, not by lashing out or begging to be seen, but by choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion. The beauty of silence is that it leaves room for truth to surface. Without your voice filling in the gaps, they're left to hear their own. And the inner voice often has more questions than answers. Why haven't they reached out? Did I matter to them? Why does this feel like a loss if I thought I didn't need them? These aren't questions that emerge when you're chasing them or trying to fix things. They only come when you stop. And let's be clear, silence is not about playing games. It's not about manipulating someone into missing you. It's about honoring your boundaries when someone else won't. It's a statement that says, I'm done having conversations that only I show up for. Silence is your way of ending the cycle, not with drama, but with dignity. In that stillness, you reclaim your worth. You give them the space to see the reality of what they've lost, not through arguments or emotional appeals, but through the undeniable power of your absence. Silence becomes your message, your boundary, your closure, all in one. Self-respect is not manipulation. This is something many people struggle to understand when they first decide to go no contact with someone who's emotionally unavailable or avoidant. They worry that by stepping back, they're playing a game, trying to trigger a reaction or trying to win by withdrawing their attention. But there's a huge difference between manipulation and self-protection. Choosing not to chase someone who consistently makes you feel uncertain, unseen, or emotionally unsafe is not a tactic. It's a boundary rooted in self-worth. When you implement no contact from a place of clarity, not resentment, not bitterness, but true emotional self-care, you're not punishing the other person. You're simply saying, I'm no longer available for a dynamic that drains me. That choice can look cold from the outside, especially the person who benefited from your availability. But it's not cold. This isn't about you not. It's courageous. It takes strength to stop showing up for someone who doesn't show up for you in return. Manipulation is when you do something solely to control another person's behavior or emotions. Self-respect, on the other hand, is about controlling your own behavior in the face of repeated disappointment. You're not trying to make them miss you. You're choosing to remove yourself because you're done abandoning yourself just to stay connected. That's not playing hard to get. That's knowing your value. Often, avoidant individuals are used to partners overcompensating for their emotional absence. They expect you to reach out, to be patient, to explain over and over again how much you care and how badly you want things to work. And if you're honest, you've probably done that more times than you can count. But at a certain point, continue to explain yourself becomes an act of self-betrayal. That's the moment where self-respect must take the lead. When you stop chasing, when you stop begging someone to meet you halfway, you're not being unkind. You're finally listening to your own needs. You're making peace more important than proving a point. You're choosing alignment over attachment. This isn't about you. That's not manipulation. It's maturity. The reality is, someone who genuinely cares about you will never be confused by your boundaries. They may be challenged by them, especially if they're not used to being held accountable. But deep down, they'll respect you for it. And those who react negatively to your self-respect, they were never truly connected to you in a healthy way in the first place. They were connected to your compliance, your emotional labor, your willingness to tolerate inconsistency. So no, pulling back isn't cruel. It isn't petty. It's not a strategy to get them to change. It's you saying, this is where I end and where your work begins. And in a world where so many people blur the lines between love and control, between affection and attachment, standing firm in your self-respect is the clearest message you can ever send. I love myself enough to walk away from what hurts. Even if I still care, you're not responsible for their growth. This truth can be one of the hardest to accept, especially when you care deeply for someone who's emotionally unavailable, avoidant, or stuck in their own patterns. When you see potential in someone, when you've shared moments of vulnerability or connection, it's natural to want to help them evolve. You hope that your love, patience, or understanding might be the thing that finally helps them open up or heal. But here's the truth: real growth doesn't come from being rescued. It comes from within. And it's not your job to be anyone's emotional savior. You can hold space for someone. You can support them, encourage them, even inspire them. But you cannot do the work for them. You cannot force someone to confront the parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding. You cannot love someone into being ready. And more importantly, this isn't about you not. You should never sacrifice your own peace in the name of someone else's potential. Because the moment you make their healing your responsibility, this isn't about you not. You start shrinking yourself to carry the weight of their wounds. People grow when they choose to, when they're pressured, not when they're guilted, and definitely not when they're being constantly reminded of how much they need to change. Growth often begins with discomfort. Sometimes the discomfort of losing something or someone that mattered. That space, that distance, that silence you create by walking away or going no contact. That can be the most honest mirror they've ever faced. But again, it only becomes meaningful if they choose to look into it. Avoidance in particular can be difficult to walk away from because their push-pull dynamic often draws out the caretaker in you. You start to believe that if you just loved them more, showed more patience, or avoided triggering their fears, things would get better. But that mindset is a trap. You're not in a relationship, you're in a project. And relationships are not supposed to feel like endless emotional labor. Even if you walking away does become a turning point for them, even if they eventually realize what they lost and start working on themselves, that's still their journey. It's tempting to want to stay close, to monitor their progress, or to be there when they finally get it. But growth born from someone else's emotional labor isn't real growth, it's dependency. And you deserve to be with someone who's doing the work for themselves, not just to keep you around. Your healing starts when you stop waiting for someone else to change. It begins when you redirect your energy from fixing them to loving yourself better. That may look like walking away. That may look like silence. That may even look like grieving the relationship you hoped it become. But what it never looks like is staying stuck in a loop, hoping your pain will become their breakthrough. Let go with grace. Let go knowing that your responsibility ends where their willingness begins. You're not walking away because you don't care. You're walking away because you finally do. About yourself. Thank you for showing up for yourself today. Thank you for being willing to break your own patterns, even when it hurts. And thank you for listening not just to my words, but to your own truth. Wherever you go from here, let it be forward, let it be free, and most of all, let it be yours. Take care of your heart. Protect your energy. And never forgetting, this isn't about you not. It might just be the loudest, most loving thing you'll ever say. Goodbye for now, and thank you.